This is a Channel 7 Eyewitness News special event. Vote 09, the official New York City Democratic primary debate for public advocate. Brought to you in partnership with the New York City Campaign Finance Board, Univision, 1010 Wins, and the League of Women Voters of New York City. Now, from the Channel 7 studios, your moderator, Eyewitness News anchor, Diana Williams.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to the first official Democratic primary debate for New York City Public Advocate. Our candidates today are Bill de Blasio, Mark Green, Eric Gioia, and Norman Siegel. And joining me in the studio to question the candidates are Eyewitness News political reporter Dave Evans and WXTV reporter with Noticias Univision 41, Sandra O'Neill. And also with us is Eyewitness News reporter Jeff Pegues, who's in our newsroom with email questions for the candidates. This debate is administered by the New York City Campaign Finance Board. The CFB is a nonpartisan, independent city agency that oversees the campaign finance program, which amplifies the impact of New Yorkers' small contributions by matching them with public funds. Eligible candidates who join the program are required to take part in today's debate. The CFB also provides public disclosure of campaign finances, enforces the city's Campaign Finance Act, and provides voters with important information about the candidates for city office through the New York City Voter Guide. We have some information for you about the job of public advocate. The public advocate is the first city official in line to be mayor. Public advocate acts as a watchdog to report failures of city services and agencies as well as elected officials, and as an ombudsman or go-between. The public advocate answers complaints and also investigates city agencies. The order that the candidates appear on stage this morning was determined by a random drawing. The candidates will have 45 seconds to answer questions, and of course, we ask you, candidates, to please stick to that 45 seconds. Our first question goes to Mr. de Blasio, and it comes from Dave Evans. Dave?
Thank you, Diana. Mr. de Blasio, let's go ahead and start with kind of an easy question. And that is, each public advocate has put his or her own stamp on the office, whether it's immigrant rights or consumer protection. What are your priorities for the office?
Well, first, thanks to WABC and all the sponsors for putting this debate together. My priorities include empowering the parents of our city. I'm a public school parent, and I believe the voice of parents is not being heard in our school system right now. And it's a mistake to not involve parents deeply in the decisions we make about the future of our kids. I think we need to reinvigorate the process of making decisions about development. I think we need more affordable housing in this city, and we need to use the City Planning Commission as an agent for the creation of affordable housing and the hiring of local residents, because we need those jobs desperately in the city. That's one of the powers of the public advocate, that role on the City Planning Commission. And I also want to protect folks in greatest need in this city in a tough economic moment. I want to make sure our child care programs and our programs to help the hungry and homeless are protected no matter how tough our budget situation is. Those are among my priorities.
Mr. Green, your priorities?
First, Diane, Dave, and Sandra, and Univision and WABC, thank you for this public service. I hope we don't too seriously hurt your ratings and revenues, but we'll see. When I was public advocate, and should I be again, I have an ethic. Those less favored in life should be more favored in law. We need an ombudsman and a watchdog to fight big interests on behalf of the average families who don't get hurt at City Hall. And so the goal is to be a socket that people can plug into, to be an ombudsman for parents, to be an investigator of public health, whatever Washington does or doesn't do, to investigate how HMOs are a great organizations if you don't get sick. And finally, I want to use all the new technology, Government 2.0, following Web 3.0, because we can deliver services and get information to government and from government in real time through Twitter and the web and Facebook to make it even more effective.
Mr. Gioia, your priorities.
Dave, especially in tough economic times, we need a public advocate who's independent, who listens to regular New Yorkers, who understands what they're going through, and who gets real results for them. As you know, I grew up in Queens. I worked my way through NYU, working nights as a janitor. I am a person this city made me to be, and for the past 8 years, I've delivered real results. I'll just give you one. When I learned that Costco was not accepting food stamps, I worked for 2 years to get them to change their policy. They recently announced they would change their policy and begin accepting food stamps stamps in New York City. That gives you an idea of what I will do as public advocate. Listen to regular New Yorkers, stand up for them, and get real results. You know, being public advocate can't just be about giving speeches or talking on television. It has to be about delivering results that make a real difference in real people's lives.
Mr. Siegel?
My overriding theme would be that this office has to be activist. It has to be visible and vocal, and it hasn't in its almost 16 years that it's been in existence. So an activist public advocate office, that's my overriding theme. Specifically, one, revitalizing the economy. Small businesses, you go around the city, you see the signs for rent. Small businesses are the mom and pop of this city. They're the heart and soul of this city. That's a high priority. Education, class size matters. No more than 20 students in a classroom. Affordable housing. There are too many people. Warehousing in the New York City Housing Authority has to end. And finally, equality. There's too much racism, too much sexism, too much homophobia in this city. I will have a deputy public advocate for equality, so anyone who has a complaint about discrimination, you come to the Siegel Public Advocate's office and we'll fight for you.
Okay, gentlemen, as we mentioned a moment ago, web viewers are able to watch this right now at 7online.com. And so we have Jeff Pegues, one of our Eyewitness News reporters, who's up in the newsroom, and he has a web question from one of our viewers for us. Jeff?
And Diana, we love the interaction with the viewers, and they're getting to us by logging on to 7online.com, obviously, and then submitting their questions. And we've gotten several questions. Let's go to one that we have already. It's from Manhattan, and Fred Jensen in Manhattan asks simply, why should there even be an office of the public advocate? And that question will start with Mr. Mark Green.
And I have to say, this question was the most asked question on the web, and it's a question people are asking. Why do we need this office? Mr. Green, let's start.
I was the public advocate. I don't remember this question being asked very often, if ever, when I was there, because we answer 1,000 complaints a month from citizens who are getting the runaround from City Hall and the bureaucracy. Second, you investigate city services, especially during this Great Recession. People really need help with housing and education and health care. And so when I exposed how the police department was not punishing abusive cops, when I exposed how water bills were too high because of a computer glitch, the people who benefited were really happy about that. And finally, you have to be a watchdog over City Hall. Mayors, not because they're good or bad, they can be indifferent when their own managers make a mistake. I was someone who blew the whistle when the government did badly, and I would again. There's no better buy in this city than for 20 cents a citizen, a voice on their side in the bureaucracy.
Mr. Joya, why do we need the office?
Especially in these tough economic times, when people who used to think they were middle class are now struggling more than ever, we need somebody at the highest levels of city government who shares their perspective. And more than shares their perspective, is willing to fight for them, no matter what the odds, to deliver results that make a difference in their life. Not too long ago, a middle-aged woman from Bayside, Queens came into my office. She used to own her own home. Her husband had his own business. She lost her home and he lost his business. She came in to apply for food stamps. She went down to my neighborhood because she was embarrassed to go to her neighborhood. And she said she felt like a criminal. She felt like there was nobody on her side. She felt invisible. She's not alone. There are a lot of people in this city who feel like there is nobody on their side. And frankly, I don't blame folks for asking this question. Because if you open up the newspapers and see a government that is too often abusive, and especially the stuff that goes on up in Albany, you want to see a change. And what I offer is a new vision and a new vigor for this office to do it in such a way that people will stop asking that question.
Mr. Siegel?
It's not surprising this question is asked. I'm asked this all the time. What is a public advocate? Why do we need it? In a few months, when I'm the public advocate, no one will ask that question because we'll be visible and we'll be vocal. It's all about individual rights, complaints about city agencies, and from those individual complaints come the systemic issues. I'll do an annual report on all the city agencies, a management report saying what they do good, what they don't do good. We have to restore integrity and trust in government. We saw the mess up in Albany, desperately seeking an adult in Albany. We need to have people in government that people will trust and believe that they have values and principles. Why do you need a public advocate? Give you an example. The executive branch of government and the legislative branch of government come together and they extend term limits against the people's will. You need a public advocate to go to fight. When there's a slush fund in the city council, you need someone from the outside like me to take on the insiders, take on the politicians. That's why you need a public advocate.
Mr. de Blasio?
Public advocate is there first and foremost to be a check and balance on the mayor and a watchdog. And you have to be able to stand up to the mayor no matter how powerful he is. I stood up to Michael Bloomberg when he was wrong on term limits. I led the opposition in the city council against what he was trying to do. I stood up to him when he was wrong on homelessness policy, when he was wrong on the education budget. I have to say, with all due respect to Mark Green, he has a little amnesia. He did not stand up to Rudy Giuliani when it mattered most. When Rudy Giuliani wanted to stay on for 90 more days at the end of 2001, Mark caved into him for political reasons, and Mark's been silent on some of the mistakes that Michael Bloomberg has made on policy issues. So the issue is who can take on this mayor today and any mayor in the future and be a voice for the people at City Hall, and if necessary, go out into communities and organize people to make sure their voices are heard.
Mr. Green, I offer you 30 seconds to respond to that.
Oh, I'd be delighted. I think reporters listening and most of the public with a memory knows there was not any public official in the 8 years of Rudy Giuliani who stood up to him more often and more successfully. Twice I sued him on police misconduct. Twice I won. Bill, right away you're getting negative, so I have to respond. You said, and your campaign is based on, you had the courage to stand up to Mike Bloomberg when he wanted to extend term limits only by legislation, overturning 2 referenda. You took his exact position when you were running for Speaker in 2005. And you were asked repeatedly, and you said, you know what, we can extend term limits by legislation and overrule 2 referenda. Your principle in both was what advantaged you. So you should be careful about citing who stands up to a mayor when you flip-flop for convenience.
Okay, Mr. Green, thank you for that. I have a quick follow-up. You all know we have 3-1.
I mean, that was a specific allegation. I think it's fair to be able to respond very quickly.
Okay, let me give you, but you've got 20 seconds.
I heard the voice of the people in 2008. What was happening was undemocratic. The mayor was trying to change term limits in an unfair manner. I stood up. I fought against it. Mark caved to Rudy Giuliani when he wanted 90 more days. He didn't respond to that because he did cave because he was trying to win an election. That's the facts. Those are the history.
Did you flip-flop?
I stood up for the people in 2008. You caved to Rudy Giuliani.
2005?
2008 was last year, Mark.
Okay.
Okay. Gentlemen, I'm going to move on because I want to follow up with a question. All of you know that we have 311 right now. We have multiple city agencies that people can go to for help. I want you to name one thing that the public advocate does that can't be duplicated by 311 or some agency. Very quickly, 15 seconds, one thing. And actually, Norm, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I talked about the slush fund before. You have a city council speaker going back at least 6 years, if not longer, and the mayor's office looking the other way. 2 of my opponents here on the city council, they didn't really blow the whistle. You couldn't do a 311 system to then take on why the city council created fictitious organizations and in their budget appropriated money.
Okay.
That's a good example.
Mr. Joy?
You need an independent watchdog. It is the only job in city government where the only purpose is to stand up for the people. So the question is, could it be duplicated? Well, maybe it could. Public advocate, however, public advocate is the most entrepreneurial job. You have to go out, find people who need an advocate, and find creative ways and to relentlessly solve their problems.
Okay, Mr. Green?
Diane, I'm glad you mentioned it. I was the first to propose 311 in New York in July of 2001, and Mayor Bloomberg graciously and generously has given me credit for it. But 311 answers information and directs you to how to apply for things and get information back. It doesn't solve the complaint. Because in my ombudsman office, I know the public advocate actually gets the complaint and resolves it. If you're a senior citizen in trouble, it'll get you an answer, not just give you information.
Mr. de Blasio.
President Obama has made clear how much community organizing is the way to change society for the better. The public advocate needs to be the community organizer in chief for this city. And a great example is when it comes to development and the need for affordable housing in this city, use that seat on the City Planning Commission and go out and organize every neighborhood, not just some, every neighborhood to maximize affordable housing and the hiring of local residents in the development process.
Okay, gentlemen. Our next question is from Sandra, and it is to Mr. Joya.
We know this office is for the public, for the city, for the public of New York. Now let's listen to a question from a resident of East Elmhurst, Queens.
Whatever the city program they're giving, it is not very clear for the people like me or some family or like ethnic background. Sometimes they don't understand all those clauses in the forms and application they have. I know there is a help you are offering, but those help sometimes it's not reaching to us.
Sandra, what a great, oh, is that the question?
No.
Oh.
Now, given the
Sorry.
it's
Hold on
okay.
1 second.
Given the diverse population of the city and with so many people reaching out for help with foreclosures or food assistance, how can you make the programs of the city more affordable and more accessible for these and other families in general?
This is a great question, and this is exactly what I've done for 8 years. As you know, in Spanish, the title public advocate is Defensor del Pueblo, defender of the people, and that is exactly what the job is. When I came into office, the food stamp application was 24 pages long. That meant even if you were a hungry mom trying to put food on your family's table, if you weren't a Harvard lawyer, there's chances are you weren't filling out that application. Well, I'm happy to tell you that due in part to my work and the work of Betsy Gottbaum and others, that application is now down to 2 pages, and 2 pages of explanations on how to fill out those 2 pages. That is what I will do, especially for new American communities who find that language access is a huge barrier. What you need to do is simplify government. There's a lot of good programs out there, but they don't often work for the people they're supposed to work for. I'd ask your viewers to check out my record and see that that is exactly what I've done for 8 years, and it is what I will do as public advocate.
Mr. Siegel.
You need to have all the forms and applications multilingual. In the 70s, many years ago, when I was working at the Civil Liberties Union, I worked with a lawyer at the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. We went to court. We got the ballots to be both in English and Spanish. We now have to expand it. We have to recognize that the immigrant groups are coming from all over the Caribbean, South and Central America, Southeast Asia, Africa. We have to be aware of that. Second, I will decentralize this office. You can't have the office in the municipal building. You've got to go to the neighborhoods. I have a satellite office in every one of the 5 boroughs. Second, we'll set up an institute of advocacy, train people in the communities in order to be advocates. On Wednesday nights, 6 to 8, and Saturday mornings, 11 to 1. We'll be at the community centers. We'll be in that gentleman's neighborhood. We'll listen, we'll do intake, and then we'll solve the individual problems. You do that, that's how you connect with people, and that's what a public advocate is supposed to be, connect with the people.
Mr. de Blasio.
In my 8 years as chair of the General Welfare Committee in the City Council, I fought to make sure people get the benefits they deserve, whether it's food stamps or Medicaid or anything that their families deserve. The government should help them with. And one of the things we had to do was pass a piece of legislation, the Language Access Bill, which came out of my committee, to make sure that the information was available in the languages most spoken in this city, so that people were not denied food stamps or Medicaid because the form wasn't clear to them. Look, this city is the greatest city in the world, and its diversity is its strength, but we've got to acknowledge if we're not speaking a lot of languages, we're leaving a lot of people out, and the city government can do better. We have the capacity to translate the forms and have translation services available by phone so that a huge percentage of our population can be served better. That's what I want to make sure we do as public advocate.
Mr. Green?
In the pre-Wiki era, when I was public advocate in the 1990s, I said I would, and I had a town meeting in each and every one of the 59 community boards throughout the city, in every borough and every community, so I could hear what people wanted and needed, and I could respond. We created a Korean hotline for that new arriving community. But now it's a new era. And so what I said earlier, Diane, in response to a question, I have a paper at markgreen.com on Government 2.0, new technology for a new democracy. And so because of computerization, instead of having to fill out a form, and Eric did reduce the size of it, we can have government send people who are qualified for an earned income tax credit or food stamps, the form filled out in their tax form, for example. I want to recreate the Council on Public Interest and Communications, COPIC. It's in the city charter for the public advocate. It's never been used, and I'll use it.
Diana, if I just may on that,
very
just 15
quickly,
seconds. And Mark, I know you've been out of government for a long time, but you should know the city of New York is already doing that. It actually, I think it was nominated for a Kennedy a Good Government Award for actually sending tax returns out to New Yorkers already filled out. It was an idea I suggested. I also wrote the law.
Okay.
That put food stamp applications online. I just want to be clear on the record.
Let me keep going here with another question here, because Mr. Joy, I know you mentioned Betsy Gottbaum. And Eyewitness News Survey USA did a poll in which 2/3 of the people that we questioned couldn't even name the current public advocate, who is, as you all know, Betsy Gottbaum. She's been in office now for 8 years. So specifically, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Siegel, what has she done right and what has she done wrong?
Well, this is one of the areas that distinguishes myself from my 3 opponents. They've all previously given her a B+. I thought I was kind of giving her a C-. She did good with regard to the education issues. She's done well with regard to children at ACS. But she's been not very visible, clearly not vocal. Even the reports that they do in her office, they don't know how to make it relevant to the community. Betsy Gottbaum has served the city well. She is not an advocate. And that's why the issue of continuing this office is now up for grabs. You need someone who is willing, if necessary, to step on a couple of toes by the insiders. You need someone who's willing to say, thank you, but that's not enough. We've got to do other things. You got to organize people in the city, and you have to fight for people, and you have to distinguish between right and wrong,
Okay.
and I know what's right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Siegel. Mr. de Blasio, Betsy Gotbaum.
I
how's she
think
done?
that Betsy Gotbaum took on a lot of the right issues. She tried to help make sure people had food stamps. She supported making sure that homeless shelters were run better. She stood up for special education parents, who are one of the constituencies in this city that gets the rawest deal from government. I think where we need to go now with the Office of Public Advocate is towards organizing communities and being out in communities and expanding the ability of communities to have an impact on government. But it's also important to be scrupulously independent. That's what Betsy was. I'd like to note that the Conflict of Interest Board recently raised a question in its report. Mark has been an employee of SL Green, the real estate company, over this last year. He's apparently made hundreds of thousands of dollars. I question whether that suggests independence. His brother is one of the leading members of the Real Estate Board of New York City. Just to say,
I think we're
his
drifting
brother
here.
is a leading advocate for the real estate industry. How is he going to be independent? What was he paid? And what did he do for that money? I think we need that answer.
Okay, I'm going to let Mr. Green respond, but I'm going to ask you all to stick with the questions, too, if we could. Mr. Green, you can respond to that
May I answer
allegation.
your question and then respond to Bill's attack on my only brother? May I answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you. I think Betsy has been unheralded in a lot of her accomplishment. She's a modest person, which personally is delightful. And she's done very good work on no-bid contracts at the Department of Education, on food stamps. But what a public advocate really has to do is spot a problem, fix a problem, and push it to resolution. When Rosa Sharippa approached me that she was a domestic violence victim who was going to be fired, I found out there were other women like Rosa, created a management labor feminist coalition citywide, and wrote a law to stop her firing and to protect women in that situation. By the way, Governor Patterson signed the law at the state level in July. That's the kind of ability to put coalitions together to help people in need. Look, the Conflict of Interest Board hasn't done anything yet. In the 8 years I was public advocate, this never came up for the obvious reason: you can't divorce your brother. I love my brother. We're all very proud that he's enormously successful. Should there be a conflict, like Eric had a conflict with a family member, he went to the Campaign Finance Board and they issued a ruling. That's fine. I would seek the same. Bill, you're a little too eager here. I understand why you're directing your fire at me, but you should probably lay off family after you plant an article. It's unbecoming of you. You want to respond?
I asked you simply what you did for the money. How much did you get paid, and what did you do for that money? It's one of the biggest real estate companies in this city. It suggests the potential of a conflict. He's a leading member of the Real Estate Board of New York, the lobby for the real estate industry. Just answer the question. What did you do for the money?
But I would suggest that if we're going to follow the rules, let's have rules, because I'll jump in on every issue, too.
Yeah, you know what, gentlemen?
And I can do that.
Okay. You know
No,
what?
there's rules, Bill. We follow
agree.
the rules.
Yeah, and so let's do try and stick with them if we could. Mark, what I didn't hear from you, and I did hear from Mr. Siegel, was a grade. You gave Betsy Gotbaum a C minus. Can you give her a grade?
A BB plus.
BB plus. And Mr. de Blasio, I didn't hear a grade from you.
B
Give me a
plus.
grade. B plus. Okay, so now, Mr. Joy, it's your turn to answer the question, which happens to be about Betsy Gotbaum.
Thank you. First, let me say this, is that there are people who are going to be watching this show who are worried about getting health insurance for their kids. There are people who are watching this show on Sunday morning worried about putting food on their family's table. Politicians bickering back and forth is what gets in the way of results. And I'll tell you, I wish we would end it. We need to elevate what we do. And it's a perfect segue into you asking about Betsy Gotbaum. Betsy Gotbaum has given 40 years of service to this city, not only as public advocate, but as chairwoman of the Historical Society, as Parks Commissioner. She is a fine person and a fine public servant. You know, it's pretty easy to tear folks down, but that's not what politics should be about. It has to be about helping people who need somebody on their side. I'll give her a B plus.
You'd give her a B plus.
I do, but my point to you, though, is I don't think it's fair to assess 40 years of a lifetime of service in a letter grade. But more than that, being public advocate means more than just name recognition. It means helping people. And I know, because I've worked with Betsy Gotbaum, that she has helped so many people in this city.
Well, let me ask you this. Most people would describe her style or her temperament as low-key. So I want, in one word from each of you, one word, please, gentlemen, if you can, I want one word that would describe your style or temperament should you be elected to the office of public advocate. So, Mr. Siegel, one word.
Easy. activist.
Mr. Joya?
Tenacious.
Mr. Green?
Persistent.
Mr. de
Inclusive.
Blasio? Inclusive.
Inclusive.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Now let's turn to Dave, who has a question for Mr. de Blasio. Dave?
Let's go ahead, if we could, and start with a question, first of all, from a voter who is in the Cobble Hill section of Brooklyn. Let's go ahead and listen.
I'm very concerned about development going on, and a lot of it is not being finished because of the economy, and especially Atlantic Yards and how it's changed and how much taxpayer money has gone into it.
And Dave, actually, before you do this, I want to explain to the candidates, because these are single-directed questions.
Correct.
So this question, Mr. de Blasio, is just for you. There will be no comment from the other candidates. And then our next question will follow down the line with individual questions for each of you. I just wanted to make that clear because we're changing the format up just a bit here.
Okay.
So go ahead, Dave.
I have a feeling the others are going to want to jump in.
I know, I do too.
It's a lively group.
Yes.
Given the debate so far. But on Atlantic Yards, for just a second, Mr. de Blasio, you were an early supporter of that project. But as we've seen, the IBO, the Independent Budget Office, has doubted whether we're going to see any profit at all from the arena, that it will likely be a money loser for the city. I think there's a lot of serious doubt that a lot of New Yorkers have about whether we're going to see the affordable housing that was promised in that development project. So given all that, do you still support this project or not now?
I support the 3,000 units of affordable housing. I support hundreds and hundreds of jobs at a living wage. And I think we still have a chance of achieving that. But no more subsidies. That project has gotten all the subsidy it deserves, and they either have to figure out a way to make it work, or we should pull the plug. And it's never been about the arena. The arena, to me, is a sidelight. The issue is the creation of affordable housing and the creation of jobs in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. And we need to make sure that there's going to be an opportunity for people to live in this city. So many people have been forced out by the incredibly rapidly rising cost of housing. We want a New York City that is going to be diverse and available to all, the New York City we've always known. If we don't create new affordable housing, it's not going to be the same New York
But
City.
I think a lot of people, though, have serious doubt about the affordable housing and that we're going to be stuck with this behemoth, this huge arena, and nothing else.
It's a fair concern, but I think the bottom line is that this is the moment of judgment. We have to get evidence from the company involved that they're going to be able to create the affordable housing they committed and the jobs they committed. If not, as I say, pull the plug. If yes, carry forward, but no more subsidies.
But you can't ignore the eminent domain aspect of this. Bill just ignored it. One of the reasons why Develop Don't Destroy Brooklyn, and I have to disclose I represented them for a couple of years, was opposed to this is because of the eminent domain procedure. You can't take private property and give it to a private entity. That's unconstitutional. And Mayor Bloomberg did a disservice the other day when he demonized the people in Develop Don't Destroy by saying it's a small group of people. They have over 4,500 people contributing. They're working hard. They're in the neighborhood. Bill wasn't there for them in the beginning. Mark supports the Atlantic Yards. Only Eric and I are opposed to it, and I'm opposed to it because of the eminent domain. You can't ignore the constitutional aspects of development.
Okay, Mr. Green, Mr. Joy, you want to?
Sure.
Go
Let me
ahead.
say, I agree with Norman. I stood with Norman, I think, probably the first week or two of this project. I mean, let's be real. There are two sets of rules in this city. If you're wealthy and well-connected, you show up at City Hall, you get a pat on the back and a wish of good luck. And if you're poor and not well-connected or working class and struggling, well, then you face an entirely different set of rules, as Sandra pointed out in that question from Queens. We need to change that. That is one of the reasons I am running for public advocate, to give real people a voice and to make sure that they get results in their life when they need it. Because government has not been working for so many people, people have grown cynical, even skeptical that government can. It's time we change that.
Okay, Mr. Joy. Mr. Green, I'll give you a moment here in just about 30 seconds.
I've been an enemy of corporate welfare for 30 years, when the government funnels money to the AIGs rather than small businesses. It's been a problem in Washington, and it's a problem here. So when MetLife and Pfizer got economic development money promising jobs and it didn't occur, they didn't give the money back. We need smart development for jobs. We're in a great recession. And for housing, so long as a percentage of the money is for affordable housing as it's been promised. No additional monies for Atlantic Yards, and we'll see whether it's going to be built.
Okay. Our next direct question is from Sandra, and it goes to Mr. Green. Sandra?
Mr. Green, you're sometimes called the perennial candidate because of the times that you've run for office. You served as public advocate for 8 years. Why should people vote for you and elect you to be a public advocate again? And is this just a stage to be mayor again?
No. They should vote against me or for me based on their judgment. Do you think I was a good public advocate before? Do you think I protected your wallet and your health by exposing how hospitals were violating the so-called Libby Zion law by doctors working 80 hours or more over a 2-week period, which led to that young woman's death? I believe, Senator, it's a fair question. I've won and I've lost. I believe an awful lot of fair-minded people will judge me on my record and my ideas, and will ultimately say that my passion for public service is more a virtue than a vice.
You interested in running for mayor?
No, I am running for public advocate. I'd be so honored to hold the office again. I obviously love it. I held it, and I know it.
Now,
Okay,
others spoke to my question. Are we speaking to this question? I'm confused.
We're trying to get through a number of questions.
Just like to make a comment on that.
What would be your comment about it? I thought it was pretty straightforward answer there.
Diane, let Bill attack me one more time, because I think he needs it emotionally.
It's not emotionally. I need the truth to come out. Look, your question was a very good one. If someone's run so many times, what does that mean? So my memory is that Mark Green attacked Geraldine Ferraro. He attacked Chuck Schumer back in those races. He attacked Freddie Ferrer, who's here with us today. He attacked Andrew Cuomo. And then after each election, he apologized for being so divisive. And I guess I'm confused why he thinks that's an acceptable strategy.
There's an answer. I'm sorry, Diane.
Mr. Green, I also want to point out that Freddie Ferrer is here because of Mr. de Blasio's invitation to be here. So, Mr. Green, go ahead.
The reason Bill is right, he said he was confused. He is. I didn't apologize after races. I ran strong races. Look, Bill ran for Speaker and lost. He wanted to run for Congress, thought better of it. He wanted to run for borough president, changed his mind because he flip-flopped on term limits. That's politics. The only issue that matters is not political attacks because Bill is armed to the teeth because he doesn't have much of a record or much of a vision. The only issue is who has the best accomplishments and vision to help you, the voters, get through these hard times.
So you didn't apologize to all the people you attacked. That's what you just said?
Yeah, gentlemen, I want you both to weigh in if you want to real quickly.
I'll weigh in. I think that using Mark's criteria, I would tell the people that are listening, do not vote for Mark Green for public advocate. Mark wasn't visible enough, in my opinion, and some of the things that he didn't do were important to the people in the city of New York. And moreover, with regard to this issue, Mark, up until now, did not answer the question, do you want to be the mayor? He just said he's not interested in being the mayor, but I'm not sure I agree with that. We know that people use this as a stepping stone, and it shouldn't be. I think it's the culmination of my career to be the public advocate, not the beginning of some political career.
Mr. Joy, you got the last word here.
Well, and then maybe it's a last word for civility and elevating the discourse. Because let me tell you, I mean, growing up in Queens, we struggled in my family. We really did. And we got really tired of politicians who thought that politics was like professional wrestling. They yelled and screamed at each other. They did everything but hit each other with chairs. And the night is still young, so who knows today. But seriously, the problem with that is not that it hurts people's feelings, but that it gets in the way of solving problems that New Yorkers are going through. And in these times, we need a public advocate who gets it, who understands what people are facing today and is willing to stand up for them and deliver results that make a difference in their lives. That is who I am. That is who this city has made me, and it's a record I have developed.
Okay. My next question is to you, and it's directly to you. You were the only council member recently who voted against the budget, and you said that you feared that some of the discretionary spending, that money that's in the slush fund, which has been already brought up, you feared that that money would go to questionable causes. So if you have these concerns about this discretionary fund or the slush fund, why did you take money from that fund for some of your pet projects?
It's a wonderful question, and I appreciate the opportunity to clear that up. I have tried to be a voice of reform in this city council. I've been offended by how broken it is. I think, like many of you, I was offended by the slush fund. When it happened, I did a few things. I proposed a Sarbanes-Oxley bill that would require the speaker and her staff to sign a document attesting to the veracity of the budget. Before the budget was voted on.
But the question is why...
I'm going to get to it. When the budget happened, I motioned that it be separated, the member items, so to speak, so that we'd have at least 24 hours to go through it, to separate the good groups, the groups that some of them, by the way, do God's work, and the groups that were phony. I was told it was not necessary, even though the council had talked about this as a reform that was necessary. I motioned that we not vote on that part of the budget, but vote on the rest of the budget. That was turned down as well. And finally, I had to take a stand. Frankly, I'm surprised I'm the only one who voted against it. It is a broken process that has led, just in the past month, for people going to jail. You should not have to choose between being a reformer and hurting senior citizens and people in your district. So let's be clear. That is the position that politicians, good politicians, have been put in. They've said, look, if you want to vote against the budget, then forget about the seniors in your district.
Should it be eliminated, the slush fund?
Yes
or no?
No doubt.
Okay. Mr. Siegel, you want to respond?
Well, the slush fund, Eric and Bill talk about that they were opposed to it, but I actually went to court representing 8 taxpayers. I've asked them to join in as an amicus or affidavits. It is outrageous that the City of New York and the City Council created fictitious organizations to budget funds. And we don't know yet who made up these names and where did the money go. I'll argue this case in November in the appellate division, and it would be good if City Council people support my clients on this issue.
Okay. I'll allow you, Mr. de Blasio,
Yeah,
Mr.
look,
Green.
Some
Mr. de Blasio.
people associated with the City Council have done some bad things, and the rest of us were outraged, and we took actions to reform the process. It's a much more transparent process now. Everyone who does anything related to member items has it disclosed publicly. I think we need to go farther. I think every member item request should go online early in the process, so I think we have to go farther.
So you don't think it should be eliminated?
I don't think member items should be eliminated. I think the slush fund issue was horrible, and any vestiges of that need to be done away with. But it's wrong to vote against the budget and then take the money anyway. That budget was there to save firehouses, to save child care centers, to keep the jobs of child welfare workers intact. That budget had a lot of good in it, and it was wrong to vote against it.
Mr. Joy, I know you want to respond to that.
Part of the problem is that, of course, it was a good budget for 99%, but that 1% is terrible. It has led to people going to jail. It has deprived taxpayers of taxpayer dollars, and it has made people really incredibly skeptical.
So give us an affidavit. We need your affidavit in court.
I appreciate the work you've done on that, but it's not the only thing you can do.
But then
I
join
think I'm the
us.
only person on this stage to ask questions publicly of the mayor's budget director and others and hold people's feet to the fire in this because I am outraged. We need a public advocate. And I think part of the difference here on Bill and my opinion is that he thinks this is a system that should go on but reformed. I'm saying it should end immediately.
Mr. Green?
I agree with Eric that we should have more content and contentiousness here, and I have not been the one throwing the chairs. On the issue of the slush fund, that's a very important question. I have released 100 new ideas for New York. We are tweeting 4 a day for 25 days until the end of the campaign. One of the ideas is that members to my left and right who give money to local groups should be barred from taking campaign contributions from those public groups. There's a very bad appearance in that, and I hope they'd agree with that law.
Okay. Our next question is from Dave, and it is to Mr. Siegel. Dave?
Yes, Mr. Siegel, as you know and as we've heard during this debate, the public advocate is first in line to become mayor if something were to happen to the mayor. But you've said in the past, I believe, that you disagree with that line of succession because the requirements for a mayor and a public advocate, those are different requirements. So let's say you do become public advocate and you win this office and something were to happen to the mayor. Are you ready to be mayor?
Here's what I would do. On the first day, I would announce to the people of the City of New York that I'm not running for mayor. I would reconfirm the point that you just stated, that the skill set to be an advocate is not necessarily the skill set to be the mayor. What I then would do is call Rudy Giuliani. I would hope he would take my call. I would call David Dinkins, and I would call Ed Koch. I hope he would take my call. And I would say to them, the three of you, I would like you to be advisors to me so we get through this 60-day period and this crisis. And then, at the end of the 60 days, there would be a special election, and someone would become the mayor, and I'd go back to be the public advocate. I further say that the controller should be the person in the line of succession. Controller supervises 700 plus employees, and in a crisis situation, having someone for that 60-day period who knows the finances of the city in a crisis situation is probably the better way to go, so we should change the charter next year.
I want to run down the line here. Mr. Joy, do you think the controller should be the next in line?
I think you could make an argument for either. I think it's important to be an elected official and not be a deputy mayor. I think that's the key point.
And Mr. Green?
Since 1831, the predecessor to this office and now the public advocate serves next in line. They should be next in line. As to your question about wanting to be mayor.
But the controller should be next in line?
No, the public advocate. But the question was broader when it went to me. I, frankly, am hardly embarrassed that I did run for mayor, obviously, and in a four-way primary with such substantial candidates as Freddie Ferrer and Alan Hevesy and Peter Vallone. I won a nomination. I got 47% of the public thought I should be mayor. Of course, 49% thought that Mike Bloomberg should be mayor. And so am I ready to be mayor? If necessary by law,
Okay.
the answer is yes.
What do you think in terms of the succession?
I think it should be an elected official, and I think it's actually refreshing that the public advocate who speaks up for the people would be someone who, God forbid it was needed, would be someone who could step in and speak for the people in that capacity. Look, and the question of who's ready, I spent 4 years working by Mayor Dinkins' side in City Hall. I spent 2 years as a regional director for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. I spent a year as Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in the U.S. Senate race and 8 years in the council. I feel ready. You hope the day never comes, but it must be an elected official taking over for the mayor if that day does come.
And you believe it should be public advocate?
I think it's appropriate, yes.
Okay. Quick question. This is for all of you to answer. All of us love this great city, but I think all of us also have our complaints about it from time to time.
Yes.
So from each of you, I want to know what's your pet peeve about New York City? Mr. Siegel, pet peeve.
The subtle and sophisticated form of racism that exists in this town.
Mr. Joya?
That's more than a pet peeve, racism, but a pet peeve is that it costs too much to take the subway and the service is lousy.
Cost of the subway. Mr. Green?
I'm sorry, I agree with Norman. Why does our policing system six times...
Gentlemen, I'm really trying to go after more a personal pet peeve.
All right,
Yeah.
all right. It's it's when the absolute number one, when you're getting in and out of a subway, when people just stand there and block the only entrance and egress. And my wife and daughter will vow that I say, "Excuse me," which loses votes, but it's because it's my pet peeve.
Mr. de Blasio, your
The
pet peeve.
epidemic of parking tickets. The way this city is giving everyone a parking ticket, whether they're innocent or guilty, everyone's getting a ticket, and it's outrageous, and I think it's corroding the quality of life in this city.
Have you gotten some?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Our next question is coming from Jeff Begase, who's up in the newsroom. He's been listening to folks who are weighing in on the internet at 7online.com. Jeff?
Yeah, Diana, they're just clicking onto the website, submitting their questions. And one question that we just recently got that I thought really stood out, it's the kind of question that can really be revealing about a candidate. This is from Barry Rosenberg in Brooklyn, who asks, can you each tell us what makes you different from your opponents and the right person for the job? We'll begin with Mr. Siegel.
I'm not a career politician. The three people to my right are career politicians. I am a civil rights lawyer. I have been fighting for people for 4 decades. I went south, I came home, and I was head of MFY Legal Services, the Civil Liberties Union, and now in private practice. I have a civil rights mindset. I believe a civil rights mindset should be in the public advocate's office. I believe that you need an outsider to hold the insiders accountable. The insiders have made a mess of so many things, from Albany down to City Hall. We've talked about some of them today. You need someone who's independent, who doesn't want to be part of the politician's club. That's who I am. Yet at the same token, I've been able to work with the people in government, but I am fiercely independent.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. de Blasio?
What makes me different? I'm a public school parent. My wife, Charlene, and I deal every day with what literally millions of New Yorkers deal with in trying to make sure our kids get a good education. So I understand the challenges that people are facing. And in a public advocate, you want someone who understands what people need because they've lived it and shares the frustrations and the urging for change, the need for change, someone who's going to do an activist effort to make sure change comes. But you can only fully understand what people are going through if you've walked a mile in their shoes. And as a public school parent, I know the voices of parents. At this moment, those voices are not being heard at City Hall, and it's a crying shame because our schools can't get better if parents aren't brought to the table as partners in that effort.
Okay. Mr. Green, what separates you from the other gentleman here?
I'd say 2 things. Depth and breadth of record and accomplishment. I'm the only one on the stage, a stage which has 4 people, each of whom is qualified to be public advocate. I'm the only one who, for 11 years, ran 2 citywide offices. Under Mayor Dinkins, I was the Commissioner of Consumer Affairs, your consumer advocate, and then with your support, your public advocate for 8 years when Mayor Giuliani was there. People know how I fought for them and got results. See, I believe actions speak louder than words. And second, while each has a history in politics and Norman in civil rights law, I'm the only one who has been a small businessman running Air America Radio, a public interest lawyer for a couple of decades, a teacher at NYU for 6 years, and an author of books, one of which has been done for President Obama and the White House is using, Change for America. So in terms of my experience for this office and my breadth over the course of my public life,
Thank you.
I think I'm distinguished for that reason.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Joya.
Two things separate me. That is my perspective and my record. This race is very personal to me. When I talk about working people and the middle class, it's not academic. It's not because I read about it in a textbook or because my staff briefed me about it before the debate. When I sit at home at Sunday night dinner and I look at my sister who's a school teacher, her husband who's a corrections officer, my dad who's worked behind the counter at the flower shop that's been in our family for 100 years, for decades, I see people who need help. When my sister told me that she'd spent $800 trying to fix up her classroom and she didn't have the money to pay for it, I worked to change the city budget to make sure school teachers get reimbursed for out-of-pocket expenses. So what you can expect from me is somebody who understands the problems of everyday New Yorkers and who has a record of solving them.
Okay. So we can get as many questions in the time remaining. We're going to reduce the time for answers down to 30 seconds. Dave has our next question, and it goes to Mr. de Blasio. Dave?
Right. Mr. de Blasio, as we saw earlier this summer, the state Senate up in Albany, after it took that little 4.5-week break, it was in the news a lot.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. The Senate did vote to go ahead and renew mayoral control of schools, but there were a lot of parents during that process who asked for more of a voice in how the schools are run. How can you make sure that parents are involved more in the education process?
Is exactly what the public advocate should be doing. And I'm going to bring a special energy to it because I'm a public school parent myself. Those reforms in Albany is one of the few good things that came out of Albany recently. More transparency, more of a forum for actual debate about where we're going on school issues, more of a role for districts again. That's something that's been lacking these last 8 years. So I think the public advocate's in the perfect position to take what happened in that law and make it actually happen on the ground, ensure there is a role for those districts. There is a place where parents come and meet decision makers. Right now, you can't reach anyone who makes decisions about your kids' education above the level of principal. I want to make sure also that every PTA in this city is active and strong, and I will use the Office of Public Advocate to organize every PTA to be as good as they can be to represent parents and create accountability in schools.
Mr. Green?
One of the top priorities for the next public advocate, notwithstanding the shrinking of the office, he has to be an ombudsman for parents who do feel shut out. The old and the new law have school leadership teams where parents and principals, working with teachers and students, come together because each has an ability to contribute something. They've been ignored. And the public advocate has to blow the whistle. I'll tell you again in response to an earlier question. Betsy Gotbaum has done very well in this area, but Mike Bloomberg he's been largely successful in education. But where he's been unsuccessful is stiff-arming with Joel Klein a lot of the parents with a kind of top-down CEO board mentality. It has to be all of us in this together.
Mr. Joy?
Parents are the most important teachers in a child's life, and too often they're shut out. I won't only tell you what I'll do as public advocate, let me tell you what I've done already. My first 6 months in office, 8 years ago, I went to every school in my district. I spoke to over 5,000 students, every parent, every teacher, every principal I could find. I said, what's right, what's wrong, and how can I help? I heard some things I thought I'd hear. So I worked and I dramatically expanded after-school activities. I built a library and I did other things. But then I heard that you had kids who were hungry in the classroom and not getting free breakfast even though they qualified for it. So I called up the school's chancellor. I had lunch with him. I told him that in Newark, New Jersey, 100% of the kids are getting free breakfast in the classroom. And you know what? It is now being piloted in New York City. 100 schools are doing it. That's what you do.
Okay. Mr. Siegel.
First, I'm a proud graduate of the public school system, and after Yusef Hawkins was killed 20 years ago, I went back to New Utrecht High School, my alma mater, with Galen Kirkland, who's now the State Commissioner of Human Rights, and we taught a class on civil rights and race relations for 12 years, 2 classes every morning. So I know what the public schools are about. We should have a separate public advocate just for the Department of Education. Community education councils, they don't have teeth. You have to put in the law that they should be able to have funds and resources to hire advocates so that they can take on the DOE. And the parent coordinators that the mayor and Klein set up, you got to coordinate all of them back to the public advocate's office. They're your network, they're your eyes and ears.
Okay. Our next question comes from Sandra, and it is to Mr. Goya.
It is. Univision's Noticias Univision 41 went to the streets of New York. We interviewed some of the residents, and here's a question from a person in Washington Heights. Let's hear.
The issue I bring up is regarding taxi drivers. We need something done to help us because look what's happening. Taxi drivers are being killed and no one is doing anything about it.
A livery cab driver was shot and killed last week in the Bronx. He was a father of 4. He was working overnight hours. What can you do to protect these drivers, many of whom are immigrants?
The question, We have to protect these drivers from violence. We also have to protect these drivers from unsafe working conditions. I issued a report about a month ago that said almost half of cab drivers in New York City, yellow cab drivers this is, don't have health insurance. And they have some of the most unhealthy jobs in New York City. There's a disease called left leg limp. Because they sit in a car all day, it hurts their backs and it hurts their bodies. Taxi drivers, both livery and yellow cab drivers, are part of the invisible New York, people that nobody is standing up for. They need a public advocate who understands what they're going through and will get them results. Partitions in the middle of their cars, cameras in every single car, and a police department that follows up on their complaints.
Mr. Siegel?
I agree this is a serious problem. I represented cab drivers back in the 90s when there were problems at TLC. Because they're recent immigrants here, especially people of color, Asian community and Latino community, they don't get the respect that they deserve, and their rights are trampled on. One, partitions. You have to make sure that every livery car, every yellow cab has the partitions. Second, you have to have a better communication system with on the floor a foot button that goes right to the police precinct and to the cars outside so that they can move quickly to protect individuals in these cars.
Mr. de Blasio.
I think these are good ideas. We should pursue them. I think it's part of a bigger problem. This kind of tragedy speaks to why we have to go farther with community policing as well. You know, the city's a lot safer, but there are so many parts of the city where people don't feel they have the kind of relationship yet with the police to really be able to address problems proactively, to really join together in an alliance to solve problems. We've got to take that next step. Community policing has been a dream, but a dream unfulfilled in this city. I think if livery drivers are able to work with the police to proactively come up with a strategy, that will make a huge difference.
And Mr. Green?
When I was public advocate for 8 years, we got a lot of complaints from cab drivers. I mean, think about it. If you go into a public building, of course, your machines can detect whether you have a weapon. Cabbies are alone. I worked with Fernando Mateo, who was the leader then, in making sure that there were partitions, and one death is too many, but an awful lot of people are protected because of that. Second, when people would be, cabbies would be retaliated against, we would protect them at the TLC. Finally, Bill Bratton was in New York and then in LA, said we should have a police dividend, more cops on the beat, so a cabbie can see a cop and report something. When we put cops in cars with air conditioning in the summer, we did the public and cab drivers no favor.
Okay. Quick question for all of you, and we asked this at the Comptroller's debate last week. Would you grade the mayor for me? Give us a grade, a letter grade if you could. Mr. de Blasio?
I've given him a B before. He's managed some things well, but what he did on term limits, I think, was an affront to democracy, and I think he is often insensitive to what people are going through in this city.
So a B from you, Mark
A
Green?
B.
An overall B. Very good on environmental and health issues, awful on term limits. And when he cut every city agency, because there's a recession, 4%, he should have. But then he cut, City Hall cut the watchdog over City Hall by 40%, the Office of Public Advocate. That was unconscionable, retaliatory, and shameful.
Mr. Joy, your letter grade?
I give him a B as well. I've stood up to the mayor when he was wrong on term limits, which was an affront to democracy, but I've also worked with him when he's right. Just about a month ago, he and I announced together the biggest investment in middle-income housing in 30 years in New York.
And Mr. Siegel?
I give him a B- C+. He's smart, he's intelligent, he's been good on management, good environment, very bad on civil rights and civil liberties, and I can hold him accountable and make him even better if he becomes the mayor next time.
Okay. You were much more generous, I think, than our comptroller advocates, or comptroller candidates last week, rather. Thank you, gentlemen. At this point, we're going to allow our candidates to give their closing comments, and they each have 1 minute to offer up their closing comments. And so we're going to begin with Mr. de Blasio.
Thank you, and thanks for having us for this good debate. Look, we need a public advocate who can stand up to any city agency, who can stand up to the mayor. When the city is not serving its people, the public advocate has to step in and, if necessary, organize communities to make a change. I stood up to the mayor on term limits. I was the leader of the opposition in the city council. When we couldn't beat him in the city council, we took it to the court system. And that's what a public advocate has to be ready to do. Look, we need a New York City Where parents are involved in schools, I want to do that as advocate. We need a New York City where the development process creates thousands more units of affordable housing, and the public advocate can do that with that seat on the City Planning Commission. We need a New York City where we invest our pension fund money and our construction money in creating local jobs for local residents. We invest in minority and women-owned businesses and small businesses. The public advocate has the seat on the pension board and can help make that happen. We need a New York City where we take care of people in greatest need, the homeless, the hungry. We protect our child care centers. The public advocate can do that. And we need a better relationship between police and communities. We can reinvigorate the Civilian Complaint Review Board. I want to make sure that happens as the public advocate.
Mark
Thank you.
Green.
So why is this candidate different from all other candidates? Look, every aspirant says that they've fought for this and they stood on your side. Again, I believe that actions speak louder than words. Let me tell you what I actually did. My actions. It was my legal petition that stopped tobacco ads trying to addict our kids. My 2 lawsuits against Giuliani reduced police misconduct. My federal action against the Commerce Department weakened the Arab boycott of Israel by disclosing companies going along with it. My federal civil rights petition forced Accessori to pick up our frail elderly more on time. And my domestic violence bill became law at the city, and now the state level. You can't fire a woman merely because she's a domestic violence victim. Second, I love new solutions to old problems. And so my 311 idea in the past, and now please you can go to my Twitter account at Green4NY and look at my 100 ideas on how to make this a better city. You see, when I say that I've stood up to big special interests over the course of my life, that's not the slogan of a consultant. That's my calling and my life. I hope you think I've earned your vote.
Eric Joya.
We need a public advocate who understands what working New Yorkers are going through today, not someone who learned about it in a textbook or their staff told them about it. I grew up in Queens. I went to PS 11 and junior high school 125. Went to St. Francis Prep for high school. I then worked my way through NYU, working nights as a janitor, a doorman, and an elevator operator. I've spent the past 8 years listening to the people I work for and delivering real results that make a difference in their lives. I stood up to Con Edison when they blacked out the people of Queens for over 9 days. I sued Exxon to clean up the worst oil spill in the United States. I've taken on predatory lenders and bad landlords, and I've worked to change the food stamp laws, not only so Costco accepts food stamps, but so that working moms get what they need to feed their kids. I understand what's going on in this city. It's very personal to me. If you want somebody to be on your side, no matter what the odds, and fight for you to get real results that make a difference in your life, then please join our campaign. We're building a grassroots campaign, block to block, building to building, stoop to stoop. I'd love you on my side, and I'd love to work together to make our city a better place.
Norman Siegel.
Yesterday, an HIV/AIDS program in the Bronx invited the 4 of us to engage in a debate. I was the only one who showed up. It was shocking and moving. I spent an hour and a half with that community, and I informed them of what their rights were, but most importantly, I listened to their concerns and their complaints. That's what a public advocate is supposed to do. Similarly, when the 9/11 families needed someone to fight for them, I fought for them. There's still 1,100 families that don't have human body parts that are dumped in a garbage dump out in Staten Island. When the Republican National Convention was here and some 1,800 plus people were arrested, mainly falsely, and were kept in excess of 24 hours, I and others went and got them out. When term limits was extended, I and others challenged that. When the slush fund was revealed that they were giving fictitious organizations money, I challenged that. That's what a public advocate is supposed to do. That's who I am. That's what I do. We have to restore integrity and trust in government. And when the government is unresponsive, when it's corrupt, and when it's abusing its power, I will be there to fight for you and to do the right thing. Vote for me, Norman Siegel, on September 15th. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a very lively debate. We appreciate it, and I'm grateful nothing was thrown. No podiums, no chairs.
No injuries.
Thank you all for being here this morning. And that wraps up our debate.